Have you ever met someone who spent years trying to forget something that happened? But the more they try to erase the memory, the stronger it becomes. Science has already proven, trying to forget a trauma is like trying not to think about a polar bear. The more you try not to think about it, the more you think about it, and then you enter a vicious cycle of suffering. You try to escape the pain, but the pain haunts you. You try to erase the past, but it haunts you. Some people spend 10, 20, 30 years carrying an invisible weight, a betrayal, an abuse, a loss, a humiliation, and that person lives trapped in that moment. Even years later, it still hurts, it still defines who that person is, it still controls how that person acts. You might know someone like that, or maybe you are that person. But what if I told you there's a Japanese philosophy over 500 years old that teaches the exact opposite of what we try to do? A philosophy that says, don't erase the crack, fill it with gold. And another, even older philosophy from Taoism teaches, do not force healing, let it happen naturally like water flowing around a stone. I'm talking about Kintsugi and WuWei, two Eastern philosophies that, when combined, can teach you something that many people don't understand. That healing from trauma isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about transforming the pain into something that no longer has power over you. This method goes against the idea of turning the page or leaving it behind in the way we're used to hearing. And it will require you to do something that seems impossible, look the trauma in the face, without running away, without denying it, without forcing anything, until one day you realize the crack is still there, but it no longer causes pain. Before I tell you the story that will explain exactly how this works, I want to tell you that, regardless of what you've been through or are going through, know that there will always be a new day, that this pain will pass, even if it takes time, but it will. Know that what happened to you doesn't define your identity. I receive many comments from people who have applied what we teach here on the channel and have managed to reframe their pain. I read most of the comments carefully, and I am very happy to know that this content transforms lives. By the way, the idea for this video came from several comments I received from people asking for help overcoming past traumas. So this script is dedicated to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your attention. I love all of you who follow me here. Now, back to the video. Chapter 1. The Day She Broke. Today I'm going to tell the story of a woman named Aiko. Aiko was 34 years old, and from the outside, it seemed like she had everything under control. Stable job as an architect, beautiful apartment, a few friends. But what about inside? Inside, Aiko had been broken for 12 years. When she was 22, she was betrayed by the first love of her life. A 4-year relationship, wedding plans, future plans. And one Saturday, she discovered he was with someone else. For months. The pain Aiko felt that day wasn't just the betrayal. It was the humiliation. It was realizing she had been deceived, that everything she believed to be true was a lie, that she had been an idiot. And you know what she did? The same thing most people do. She tried to forget. She deleted all the photos. She blocked him everywhere. She avoided places that reminded her of him. She tried to turn the page. In the first few months it worked. She went out, met new people, tried to move on. But then, without warning, something would happen. A song, a smell, a random phrase, and it would all come back. The pain, the anger, the humiliation, as if it had happened yesterday. She got into other relationships, 3 to be exact, and all ended the same way. Because Aiko couldn't trust, she looked for signs of betrayal in everything. A phone turned face down, an unanswered message, a 10-minute delay. Everything was suspicious. Everything was a threat. You need to get over it, his friends said. It was so long ago, leave it in the past. And Aiko tried, she really tried. But how do you leave behind something that lives inside you? At 34, 12 years after the betrayal, Aiko still carried that burden. Not as a memory, but as an open wound. And the worst part? She was ashamed of it. Ashamed of still being trapped by it. Ashamed of not being able to get over it. Until the day she read about a Japanese bowl that was broken 500 years ago and still exists today, and that it's worth more now than it was when it was whole. Chapter 2. The Golden Bowl. Send, she was in a bookstore on a Sunday afternoon, not looking for anything specific, just killing time. And then she saw a book with a picture of a bowl on the cover, a ceramic bowl with cracks filled with gold. The title, Kintsugi, The Art of Healing with Gold. She didn't know why, but she bought the book. And when she got home, she read the introduction all at once. And something she read changed everything. In 15th century Japan, when a ceramic bowl broke, the artisans didn't throw it away. They took the pieces, glued them back together with a special resin mixed with gold powder. The bowl became functional again. But now, with golden veins running through the bowl, the cracks weren't hidden, they were highlighted. And the broken and mended bowl was worth more than the original perfect bowl. Aiko stopped reading. She reread it 3 times. The broken bowl was worth more. She looked at her own life. She spent 12 years trying to hide the crack, trying to pretend it didn't exist, trying to be the person she was before she broke. But what if the problem wasn't the crack? What if the problem was trying to hide it? That night, Aiko couldn't sleep, because for the first time in 12 years she had a different thought. What if I don't need to forget? What if I just need to give it new meaning? On Monday morning, she did something she hadn't done in years. She sought help, but not just any help. She sought a therapist who worked with Eastern philosophies, and that's how she met Dr. Lin Chen. Chapter 3. The first session. Dr. Chen's room didn't look like a traditional office. It had cushions on the floor, a huge window overlooking the garden, and on her desk, several ceramic bowls, all with cracks filled with gold. Aiko sat down, not on the cushions but in a regular chair. She wasn't ready for all of this yet. Aiko, tell me what brought you here. Aiko told everything. The betrayal 12 years ago, the attempts to forget, the failed relationships, the shame of still being trapped in it, and when it ended, she expected to hear some advice about letting go or forgiving. Dr. Chen didn't say any of that. She only asked a question. Have you tried to forget? Yes, for 12 years. And did it work? Aiko gave a humorless laugh. Obviously not. So why do you keep trying? Silence. Aiko had no answer. Dr. Chen picked up one of the bowls from the table. She ran her finger along the veins of gold. This bowl is 200 years old. It was broken, mended, and today it's worth more than $10,000. Do you know why? Aiko shook her head. Because the Japanese philosophy of Kintsugi understands something that the West has forgotten. Imperfection has value. A scar has beauty. A crack tells a story. But I don't want this story, Aiko said, almost crying. I want to forget. I know, but forgetting isn't healing, it's denial. And denial keeps you trapped in the past just as much as rumination. Maybe even more so. Because when you deny, you don't process, you don't integrate, you just push it under the rug. And then anything lifts the rug and everything explodes again. Aiko felt something breaking inside her. Not her breaking, but the illusion that she would one day be able to erase it. So what do I do? You do what the Kintsugi artisans do. You put the pieces together, you look at the crack and you fill it with something valuable. You don't hide it, you don't deny it, you transform it. As? First, we need to stop fighting against the memory, and that leads me to another philosophy. It's called WuWei. It comes from Taoism. It means effortless action or non-forcing. It's the idea that when you try to force something, like forgetting a trauma, you create more resistance, more suffering. But when you stop forcing and allow things to flow naturally, healing happens on its own. Aiko didn't understand. Are you telling me not to do anything? No, I'm telling you to stop doing the wrong thing. You've spent 12 years trying not to think about the trauma, trying to avoid triggers, trying to protect yourself from anything that reminds you of it. That's effort, a lot of effort, and it's exhausting you. WuWei isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing without resisting. It's about accepting what is, without fighting against it. Chapter 4. Water and Stone. Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the window. Come here. Aiko went. Outside there was a small Zen garden with a stream. The water flowed over stones, skirting obstacles, following its natural course. Do you see that big rock in the middle of the stream? I see. The water doesn't try to move it. It doesn't try to destroy it. It doesn't try to pretend it doesn't exist. The water simply flows around, and over time, the shape of the stone changes. Not because the water forced it, but because the water was consistent, patient, natural. Trauma is the stone. You've spent 12 years trying to move that stone with brute force, trying to make it disappear, but the stone is still there, and you're exhausted. Aiko felt the tears streaming down her face. Because it was true. She was exhausted, tired of fighting, tired of running away, tired of having to control herself to avoid thinking about it. "So what do I do?" Aiko asked again, her voice breaking. "You stop fighting. You accept that the stone exists, and you let the healing happen naturally like water. But how? How can I accept something that destroyed me?" Dr. Chen turned to Aiko. "You don't accept what he did. You accept that it happened and that you can't change it. Accepting isn't agreeing, it's not forgiving, it's not justifying. It's just stopping fighting reality." At that moment, something clicked in Aiko's head. She had spent 12 years in a tug-of-war with the past, trying to pull it back, trying to change what couldn't be changed. And while she pulled, the past pulled back, and she never got anywhere. "What if I stop pulling?" Aiko asked, more to herself than to the therapist. "Then you can finally move forward." Dr. Chen returned to the table and picked up a piece of paper. She drew a river with a rock in the middle. That's what WuWei is like. The water doesn't fight against the rock. It recognizes the rock's existence and flows around it. And do you know what happens over time? The rock becomes smooth, rounded. It's still there, but it no longer hurts those who pass by it. Trauma is the same. You won't forget. But over time, if you stop fighting against it, it will lose its sharp edges. It will become just a part of your story, not the whole story. Aiko wiped away her tears. "Okay, I understand the part about stopping fighting, but how do I do that? What's the first step?" "The first step is the hardest. You're going to have to look at the trauma, really, without running away, without denying it. You're going to have to pick up the pieces you've spent 12 years trying to hide." Chapter 5. Putting the pieces back together. Dr. Chen asked Aiko to do something that seemed insane. Write everything about the betrayal, every detail, every feeling, every thought she had that day, and in the days that followed. But why? Why would I relive this? Because you've never truly lived. You ran away. And when you run away from something, you don't process it. It stays there, frozen, waiting. When you write, you take it out of your head and put it on paper. Then you can look at it without being swallowed up by it. Aiko went home that day afraid to open the box she had locked away for so long. But she opened it. That night she picked up a notebook and began to write. And once she started, she couldn't stop. She wrote for 2 hours about the day of the discovery, about the pain, about the anger, about the humiliation, about how stupid she felt, betrayed, disposable. She cried as she wrote. She cried all she hadn't cried in 12 years, because she had always run away before the tears came. But this time she didn't run away. She stayed and let the pain out. When it was over, she was exhausted. But something different had happened. For the first time in 12 years, she had faced the trauma head-on, and she hadn't died. She hadn't fallen apart. She had only felt. At the next session, Dr. Chen asked, "How did it go?" "Horrible, painful, but also liberating. I don't know, I feel lighter, like I've taken a weight off my shoulders. Because you took it away, you stopped carrying it alone. Now the pain is on paper. You can look at it without it being there." Dr. Chen picked up the notebook Aiko had brought. "Now comes the most important part. We're going to do Kintsugi. We're going to take these shards you wrote on and fill them with gold. Like this? You will rewrite this story, but this time not as a victim, as a survivor. You will look at each piece of pain and ask, what did I learn from this? How did this make me stronger? What wisdom did I gain that I wouldn't have had without this pain?" Aiko remained silent. "But I don't want to be grateful for the betrayal. I'm not going to pretend it was good. Nobody's asking for that. Kintsugi isn't about pretending the bowl never broke. It's about accepting that it broke and finding beauty in how you mended it. The betrayal wasn't good, but you survived. And the person who survived is stronger, wiser, more compassionate than the person who never went through it. Chapter 6. The Golden Veins. Dr. Chen gave Aiko an exercise. For every piece of pain she had written down, she had to write down a lesson, a transformation, a treasure that came from it. Aiko resisted at first. It felt wrong. It seemed like she was justifying what happened. But Dr. Chen explained, reinterpreting is not justifying. It's recontextualizing. It's looking at the same story from a different angle. The Brazilian psychiatrist Augusto Cury talks about this. He calls it creating light windows alongside the killer windows. The killer windows are the traumatic memories. The light windows are the memories of overcoming, learning, and growth that you build alongside them. When you only have the killer window, every time you look at that memory, you only see pain. But when you build a light window next to it, you begin to see the complete story. The pain and the strength, the betrayal and the resilience, the breakdown and the rebuilding. Aiko understood. She wasn't going to erase the memory of the betrayal, but she was going to add other memories alongside it. Memories of how she survived, of how she grew, of how she rebuilt herself. She began to write. He betrayed me, and I learned that my worth doesn't depend on who chooses me, it depends on how I choose myself. I felt stupid, and I learned that trusting isn't stupidity, it's courage. The problem wasn't that I trusted him, it was that he wasn't worthy of trust. I shut myself off for 12 years, and I learned that overprotection is imprisonment. I don't want to live protected. I want to live whole. Each sentence was a vein of gold, each reflection was a mend, and little by little, the story was changing. Not the facts, but the meaning of the facts. Chapter 7. The First Time Without Pain. 3 months later, Aiko was in a cafe with a friend. They were talking about relationships, and her friend mentioned a betrayal that had happened to her, and Aiko, without thinking, told her story. It was the first time in 12 years that she had told that story without feeling a tightness in her chest, without feeling her throat close up, without feeling the humiliation burn. She told it as fact, as history, not as an open wound. And when she finished, her friend said, "Wow, you're so strong, I don't know if I could do it." Aiko smiled. "I also thought I wouldn't be able to. But we can achieve much more than we imagine." That night, Aiko called Dr. Chen. "Something happened today. I told her the story of the betrayal and it didn't hurt. For the first time, it didn't hurt." Dr. Chen had been expecting this. "Do you know what this means? It means you're no longer in the story. You're outside of it. You can look at the story, talk about it without being swallowed up. That's WuWei. You stopped fighting and the healing happened naturally. But the memory is still there," Aiko said, "and it will always be there. Kintsugi doesn't erase the crack, it only transforms it into something that doesn't hurt anymore. You'll never forget what happened. But now, when you remember, you don't just see the pain, you see the person you've become by surviving it." Aiko was silent for a moment, and then she said something she didn't expect. "I think I'm ready to try again." "Try what?" "Trust, open up, let someone in." Dr. Chen smiled on the other end of the line. "You're ready. Because now you're not entering a relationship to heal the wound. You're entering because the wound no longer controls you." Chapter 8. The New Relationship. 6 months later, Aiko met someone, a guy named Daniel, also an architect. They met at a work event. At first, Aiko felt the old pattern trying to return, the distrust, the vigilance, the fear. But this time, she understood what was happening. And instead of fighting the fear or running away from it, she simply observed. "Fear is here, it's okay, it doesn't control me anymore." She applied WuWei. She didn't force confidence, she didn't pretend the fear didn't exist, she just let things flow. Naturally, Daniel was patient. When Aiko became distant, he didn't pressure her. When she shared something about her past, he listened without judgment, and little by little, trust grew. Not because Aiko forced it, but because she allowed it. One day they were having dinner and Daniel asked, "Aiko, why do you always get tense when I pick up my cell phone?" Aiko could have denied it. She could have lied. but she decided to be honest. Because I was betrayed years ago, and I still have triggers. It's not about you, it's about the wound I'm still healing. Daniel held her hand. Thank you for telling me, and just so you know, you can trust me. But I also understand that trust is a process, not a decision made overnight. At that moment, Aiko realized something. She had found someone who understood that she had cracks, and that it was okay because everyone has them. Chapter 9. The Relapse. 8 months into their relationship, things were going well. But then, one Saturday, Daniel said he was going out with his friends. Aiko said, "Okay, you can go." But that night, when he still hadn't returned and wasn't answering her messages, the trigger came strong. The old feeling of panic, that he was with someone else, that she was being deceived again. She tried to apply WuWei. She tried not to fight the fear. But this time it didn't work. The fear was too great, and she started sending messages, lots of messages, calls, until Daniel answered, confused. "Aiko, I'm coming back. My phone battery died. Is everything all right?" She hung up and cried, because she was sure she had ruined everything, that she had been too paranoid, that Daniel was going to break up with her. The next day she called Dr. Chen. "I messed everything up, I relapsed. I've gone back to being that paranoid and insecure person." Dr. Chen paused. "Aiko, do you remember the Kintsugi bowl?" "I remember." "The bowl wasn't perfectly repaired. The cracks are still there. And from time to time, depending on the light and temperature, some cracks become more visible. This doesn't mean the bowl is broken again. It just means the crack will always be a part of it." Ayu had a trigger. This isn't a relapse, it's part of the process. The trauma doesn't disappear, it just loses power. But from time to time, in specific situations, the trauma can still resurface. And when that happens, you haven't failed. You're just human. Aiko took a deep breath. "And now?" "Now you do what you've always done. You observe the fear without being swallowed by it. You talk to Daniel, you explain, and you continue. Because healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. You'll go through the same places, but each time at a different level." Aiko talked to Daniel. She explained the trigger. She apologized for her paranoia, and Daniel, instead of getting angry, understood. "Aiko, I knew you had a past, and I chose to stay even knowing that. We'll get through this together, okay?" At that moment, Aiko realized she had found someone who didn't want a perfect version of her. They wanted the real version, with cracks and gold, with fear and courage, with a past and a future. Chapter 10. The Complete Transformation. 2 years after her first session with Dr. Chen, Aiko was sitting in the same room, but this time it was her last session. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Chen asked. Aiko thought before answering. "I feel whole, not perfect, whole. I still have the cracks, but they don't define me anymore. They're just part of who I am." "And what about the memory of the betrayal?" "It's still there, but now when I remember it, I don't feel that sharp pain anymore. It's more like a scar. You know it's there, but it doesn't hurt anymore." Dr. Chen smiled. "That's Kintsugi. You haven't forgotten, you've transformed. And that's WuWei, you've stopped fighting and allowed healing to happen naturally." "You know what's funny?" Aiko said. "I spent 12 years trying to go back to being who I was before the betrayal, and now I realize I don't want to be that person. That person hadn't lived, hadn't been broken, hadn't been mended. She was whole, but she was also fragile. And who are you now? I am the bowl with veins of gold. I was broken, and that made me more valuable, not despite the cracks, because of them." Dr. Chen picked up the bowl that was on the table, the same one Aiko had seen in the first session. "Take it. It's for you." Aiko held the bowl carefully. She ran her finger along the veins of gold, and for the first time in years, she didn't see the cracks as something bad. She saw them as history, as survival, as beauty. A neuroscientist at Stanford University who studies trauma and memory explains, "When we try to suppress a traumatic memory, the brain interprets it as a threat and strengthens the memory. It's a defense mechanism. The brain thinks, If it's trying so hard to forget, it must be important to remember. But when we accept the memory and recontextualize it, the hippocampus can finally process it and store it in a less emotional way. The memory doesn't disappear, but it loses its emotional charge. A clinical psychology researcher at the University of Oxford, who studies resilience, says, "The difference between people who get stuck in trauma and people who recover is not the absence of pain. It's the ability to create meaning from pain. When you find meaning in suffering, when you can say, 'This made me stronger, wiser, more compassionate,' you transform the experience from victim to survivor. And this shift in narrative is what we call post-traumatic growth." A Tai Chi Chuan master and scholar of Taoism explains, "WuWei is not passivity, it is action aligned with nature. When you try to force something against the nature of things, you create resistance. But when you work with nature, you work effortlessly." In the context of trauma, forcing forgetting is going against the nature of the mind. The mind was not made to forget significant experiences, but it was made to integrate, process, and learn. When you allow this natural process, healing happens on its own. But here's the part nobody tells you about healing trauma. Aiko didn't stop at the relationship, because the system she learned wasn't just about overcoming betrayal, it was about transforming any pain into wisdom. She applied Kintsugi to her relationship with her mother, who had been distant her whole life. Instead of pretending the hurt didn't exist, she looked at the crack and asked, "What can I learn from this?" And she realized that her mother's distance had taught her to be independent, to not depend on external validation, to be self-sufficient. She applied WuWei to her career. She stopped forcing promotions and started doing the best work possible without worrying about results. And ironically, she was promoted 6 months later. Because when you stop forcing, you stop creating resistance. She applied it to the mistakes she made, to the times she hurt people, to the times she failed. Instead of carrying guilt, she looked at each mistake as a broken shard that could be mended with gold, with a lesson, with growth. 3 years after the first session, Aiko gives talks about resilience, and do you know what she says at the beginning of each talk? "I didn't come here to tell you how I forgot my trauma. I came to tell you how I learned to live with it. Because the only way to forget a trauma is by having Alzheimer's. I transformed, and that transformation is what made me who I am today." And then she shows a photo, her at 22 smiling, unaware that she was about to be betrayed, and another photo, her at 37, with the same cracks, but also with veins of gold running through each one of them. "Which of the two do you think is prettier?" she asks. The audience always points to the second option. And Aiko smiles. Exactly, because beauty doesn't come from perfection. It comes from a story of overcoming. It comes from cracks mended with gold. Chapter 11. The Complete System. Years after that first session, Aiko still feels the same way. She lives in the same apartment. She has the same job. From the outside, nothing has changed. But what about the inside? Inside, she's a completely different person. She no longer wakes up afraid to trust. She no longer lives running away from triggers. She no longer carries shame for still remembering. Because she understood the entire system. Kintsugi. Accept the cracks and fill them with gold. Transform pain into wisdom. WuWei stop forcing the healing process and allow it to happen naturally, like water flowing around a stone. But do you know what she learned that was more important than any philosophy? That healing has no deadline, that each person has their own time, that there is no right or wrong. There is only the process, and that you can be broken and whole at the same time. You can have cracks and still be valuable. You can remember and not suffer. You can carry the past without being carried by it. Because trauma doesn't define you, it defines what you survived. And surviving is, in itself, an act of courage. Today, Aiko is 38 years old. She's still with Daniel. They are engaged. And the other day he asked, "Do you still think about him?" Aiko didn't even need to ask who he was. Sometimes, but it doesn't hurt anymore. How did you do that? Aiko thought. How could she summarize years of therapy, crying, processing, Kintsugi and WuWei into a simple answer? I stopped trying to forget, and I started to transform. Transform how? I accepted that he broke me, but I also accepted that I repaired myself, and the repaired version is stronger than the version that was never broken. Daniel was silent for a moment, and then he said, "You are the strongest person I know." Aiko smiled. "I'm not strong. I'm broken and patched up, and I've learned that this is the same thing." Now let me ask you something. You've made it this far in the video. That means you're carrying something. Maybe it's a betrayal like Aiko's. Maybe it's a loss, a humiliation, something you've been trying to forget for years but can't. And you're tired of fighting, tired of running away, tired of carrying this weight. You might be thinking, but my situation is different, it's worse, it's more complicated. You're right, your situation is different, but the principle is the same. You don't need to forget. You need to transform. You don't need to erase the crack. You need to fill it with gold. You don't need to force healing. You need to allow it to happen naturally. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you. The trauma doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it in a way that doesn't destroy you anymore. And you know what's most beautiful about that? It's that when you stop trying to be who you were before the trauma, you can finally become who you were always meant to be. Someone who lived, who suffered, who broke, who mended, who grew. The perfect bowl has never been touched by life. The bowl with veins of gold has been destroyed and rebuilt, and it is the second one that has value. You are not less valuable for having cracks. You are more valuable for having survived. So stop trying to forget, start transforming. Look at the trauma, accept that it exists, and ask, what can I learn from this? What gold can I put into this crack? Because Kintsugi teaches you that beauty comes from imperfection, and WuWei teaches you that healing comes from non-resistance. You don't need to fight the past. You just need to stop letting it control the present, and when you do that, you'll realize something. The cracks are still there, but they don't hurt anymore. They just tell a story, the story of someone who broke and chose to mend themselves with gold. If you enjoyed this content, I want you to know, you're not alone. Thousands of people who watch this channel also carry cracks, and we're all learning to fill them with gold. You don't need to be healed to be valuable. You just need to be alive and trying. If you've watched this far, thank you so much for your attention and your time. This means you are truly committed to your transformation, and I deeply admire that. See you in the next video. And remember, cracks don't make you broken. They make you unique, and be present, walk with honor, follow the path,